Okay, I think we'll make a start. Hello, everyone. You're very welcome to this webinar, an introduction to standard setting. Of course, the first thing that happens is my slides won't advance. Here we are. Okay, hopefully we won't have too many technology glitches. Please be patient if we do. I'm usually a listener on these webinars rather than a presenter, so I hope I get things right. So I'm Yvonne Lynch. I'm chair of the IAA's Professionalism Committee, and in my day job, I'm chief executive of the Society of Actuaries in Ireland. The purpose of the IAA's Professionalism Committee is to encourage and to promote the development, maintenance and the enhancement of professional actuarial practice around the world. And one of our functions is to provide guidance and support to IAA member associations on aspects of professionalism, including standard setting. Last year, we carried out a survey of association standard setting activities. And in the replies, a number of associations asked for help with developing processes or content or standards. And so in response to this, this is the first in a series of virtual events on standard setting. I'll tell you about the others later on. I expect, given the way that we promoted this webinar, that many of you listening are involved in discussions within your associations on how to get started with standard setting, or maybe how to build on the standard setting processes that you've already started. But others may be here just to understand standard setting better for your own professional development, perhaps. Whatever your motivation for being here, you're all very welcome. I hope that you'll find the webinar helpful and insightful. A couple of housekeeping points before we begin. We will have time at the end of the presentations for some questions and answers. And to put your questions, just click on the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen and type in your question. You can add your name or type it in anonymously, whichever you feel more comfortable with, and we'll try and answer as many of the questions as we can at the end of the session. Comments are also very welcome. I know there are some very experienced standard setters in the audience today, so if you have words of wisdom to share with us as well, we'd be delighted to hear from you. And a recording of this webinar will be available on the IAA's YouTube channel later. Okay, so what are we going to cover today? Well, I'll start by giving you an overview of standard setting. Why do we set standards? What is involved in setting standards? And then I'm going to hand over to Hilary Mannanen. Hilary is co-vice chair of the IAA's Actuarial Standards Committee. And she will talk about Isaps, the international standards of actuarial practice that the IAA has developed and is continuing to develop. She'll also talk briefly about international actuarial notes, and she'll introduce a new concept that's under consideration at the moment, which is specimen actuarial standards. As I said, we have Q&A at the end. The Q&A will be hosted by Amali Sonobratny. Amali is the IAA's Director of Technical Activities. Thank you very much for joining us today, Amali. Also here with us today, but we have Nancy Kelly, who's in the background, making sure that all the logistics run smoothly. So thanks to you as well, Nancy. We'll also be joined at the Q&A by Simon Wasserman. Simon is an observer to the Professionalism Committee. In other words, an interested party, comes along to our meetings, contributes to our discussions. Simon is from the UK, works with the UK Financial Reporting Council. But I'll introduce Hilary and Simon more fully as we go through the session today. Okay, so setting standards, why do it? Why bother? Well, first and foremost, we set standards with the objective of protecting the public, in particular protecting the users of actuarial work and the persons who are ultimately affected by that work, be they, for example, policyholders of insurance companies, members of pension schemes, and so forth. A standard of actuarial practice sets down how actuaries are expected to behave in carrying out actuarial work. For example, a standard might set down how methodologies and assumptions should be decided and how results should be communicated to users, with a view to ensuring that the users of actuarial work can rely on that work. The standard sets a minimum standard in relation to the matters covered, and not a low minimum, but rather standards aim to foster the high quality that's expected in work performed by a professional. A standard may and often will provide scope for actuaries to exercise professional judgment in terms of deciding how to implement the standard in particular situations. And this allows actuaries to make well thought out decisions that have regard to the particular circumstances. However, standards by their nature tend to narrow the range of possible decisions that may be made. In other words, standards foster consistency, and they help to prevent the situation where different actuaries make wildly different assumptions in similar situations or faced with similar data. Standards provide criteria and benchmarks for evaluating actuarial work by setting down expectations on how the work will be performed. And a byproduct of this is that standards establish a basis for holding actuaries accountable for their work, as befits any professional work. But as well as protecting the public, standards act as a very valuable support for actuaries. They provide guidance on what is considered to be appropriate professional practice in particular areas of work. Standards and the associated accountability, which is often through an association's discipline process, help to create confidence in actuarial work and thereby help to enhance the reputation of actuaries. And if an actuary's work is challenged, the fact that the actuary can point to a standard and to their compliance with the standard can be very helpful in defending the quality of the work. In similar vein, situations do arise where actuaries come under pressure to cut corners or to make assumptions that will deliver a particular result. And in this situation, being able to point to the professional responsibilities that are set out in standards of practice and codes of conduct can be a great support. So what's involved then in setting standards? In the next few slides, I'll talk about some models and standard setting processes. But first, I want to emphasize that there's no single or correct way to develop and implement standards. So nothing that I say today is intended to be prescriptive. If you are thinking about how your association might do standard setting, do bear in mind that you are free to adapt anything that's suggested today to suit your own particular circumstances, your own needs and requirements. Another thing I would say, actually, don't be afraid to start small. Okay, to set a foundation and to build on it over time. So standard setting models, one possible model is self-regulation, where an actuarial association itself establishes processes for standard setting, for developing and publishing and promoting standards, or it might set up a separate entity to do this, and that might be preferable in a situation where, for example, this might add to the credibility of the whole standard process. It might add to the perceptions of independence and integrity of the standard setting process. Another model is external regulation, where standards are set by an external body. That might be, for example, a regulator or a government agency. And typically this would be underpinned by legislative requirements for particular work to be done in accordance with the standards, regardless of whether that work is done by members of an actuarial association or by others. And sometimes a mixed model is adopted. For example, some standards might be set by an actuarial association and others by an external body. For example, in the UK at the moment, the Institute and Faculty of Actuaries sets ethical or conduct-related standards, while technical standards are set by the Financial Reporting Council. In deciding which model might be appropriate for any particular jurisdiction, it'll be important to consider the needs of the users of actuarial work and how those needs are best served. For example, will one model have significantly wider reach in terms of application than another model? Will one model be less at risk of undue commercial influence than another model? Which model will deliver standards in the most timely and cost-efficient manner, while also ensuring that there's good governance and good oversight over the end-to-end process? Consider also the needs of the actuary profession itself. What do actuaries need? What supports do they need, and how can they best be delivered? How can the profession ensure that the chosen approach doesn't undermine its reputation for integrity and objectivity, and indeed enhances that reputation? And there might be factors specific to your jurisdiction, including how various local stakeholders might perceive the different approaches. So moving on to standardizing process and the various considerations to take into account. Again, it's quite a lot to think about, but don't be overwhelmed. As I was saying earlier, there's absolutely nothing wrong with starting small, getting a foundation in place and building on it over time. The first thing to think about is, do you actually have authority to set standards and to mandate that your members follow those standards? That authority might derive from legislation. There could be legislative requirements for particular work to be done in accordance with standards set by a particular body, which may be an actuarial association. Or the authority might derive from the association's constitution, its charters or bylaws, articles of association, whatever applies in your jurisdiction. And compliance with those standards then may be a condition of membership, or that may be covered in the code of conduct of the association, which itself should be binding on members. What kind of organizational structure will you need to set standards? Who will do what? Who will decide what standards are needed? Decide, yes, that's a good idea, let's allocate resources to it, let's proceed and develop a standard. Who will then do the drafting? Who will approve the standard initially for consultation with members and other stakeholders, and ultimately for publication and promotion? Who will provide oversight and accountability over the whole standard setting process to ensure that the various steps are followed and that there's appropriate objectivity, independence, professionalism, and so forth throughout the whole process? Will you be able to do all this within your existing structures, your existing committees, working groups, and so forth, or will you need to restructure? Do you have capacity? Do you have enough resources, or will you need to engage additional resources? And will whatever resources used, will they be paid resources? Will they be, for example, staff, contractors, consultants? Will they be volunteers, members of your association? Will it be a mixture of both? In my own experience, the volunteer model can be hugely effective because there are many actuaries who are very willing, very keen indeed to give back to a profession that has afforded them a good career, and who are keen to see the reputation of that profession grow both locally and internationally. You might find it useful to involve non-actuaries in the work. Non-actuaries can bring a different perspective. They can bring valuable challenge. They can help to improve the oversight of the standard setting process. And you might be surprised at how positive a response you receive to invitations to become involved, even on a volunteer basis. It can be a good experience for non-actuaries. It can look good in CVs as well. Don't forget, some administrative support will be needed to set up meetings, keep notes of discussions and decisions, follow up on any actions agreed. This can be quite a good role maybe for a junior member of the association who wants to get involved and learn from being present and being involved in the discussions around the setting of standards. Depending on the subject matter, you might also need to budget for some legal input. Think about the scope and the format of standards. To what areas will they apply? Will they be cross-practice? Will they practice specific? Will there be a mixture? What matters will be covered? Will there be technical actuarial matters, or will they also cover broader conduct matters? For example, how to assure the quality of actuarial work. Having thought about the needs of users, the needs of actuaries, you might anticipate developing a number of standards over a period of time. If so, how will the overall suite of standards be constructed? A good starting point might be to introduce a cross-practice standard similar to the Isap on general actuarial practice, and let that act as a foundation for other standards. Another thing to consider is whether standards should be principles-based or rules-based. A principles-based standard sets out high-level principles and requires the actuary then to use a degree of professional judgment in applying those principles in particular situations. So in essence, it provides a framework, an analytical framework for exercising judgment, and it identifies factors that the actuary should consider when making relevant decisions. A rules-based standard, on the other hand, is much more prescriptive. It sets down detailed rules which an actuary complying with the standard must follow. Again, being clear about the objectives will help you to make decisions on whether to adopt a principles-based or rules-based approach, whether for your standards across the board or for individual standards. For example, if your aim is to address perceived gaps in a regulatory framework, then a rules-based approach might be appropriate. But if there's already a comprehensive rules-based regulatory system in place that governs the actuarial work in question, and what you're trying to do is provide supports to actuaries in interpreting and implementing that framework, a principles-based standard might be more appropriate. Also worth thinking about is the overall style of your standards and the use of language. It's helpful to have a consistent style across your various standards. So, for example, to have a consistent approach to setting out at the start of a standard its scope, its purpose, and to whom does it apply. Care should be taken in the use of language. For example, to avoid ambiguity and confusion, it's advisable, I think, to define terms such as shall, must, should, may. They can mean different things to different people. Finally, it's important to be clear about the status of the standard. Standards may be written with the intention that their use will be mandatory for particular work performed by persons who are under the authority of the standard setter. So, for example, members of an actuarial association, or compliance might be a legislative requirement. However, in some situations, even if mandatory compliance is the ultimate goal, there might be advantages in having a transition period when compliance is recommended rather than mandatory. And if this is combined with active engagement with the persons to whom the standard will apply, to help them to understand and implement the standard and to listen to any concerns, any issues that they may raise and respond to them, this may help to build support for the standard and for standards generally. So having thought about why and how you want to develop standards, it's good to document the due process that will be followed. And that simply means writing down a transparent set of procedures that will be followed to develop standards, expose them for consultation with members and with other stakeholders, ultimately publicize them, and periodically review and update them. Having a documented due process gives everyone involved in the process clarity about what their role is, what's expected from them, and helps ensure that the work is carried out in a comprehensive and an efficient way, and that it results in standards that are appropriate and proportionate. And this in turn helps to create confidence in the independence and the integrity of the standard setter. Under the IAA's internal regulations, an association that adopts actuarial standards must have in place a formal process for doing so, and the IAA helpfully sets out certain minimum criteria that must be reflected in this due process. The due process doesn't have to be long and complicated. For example, the Caribbean Actuarial Association has a due process on its website that's just 12 short, succinct points. If you'd like to hear more about it, Lisa Wade from the Caribbean Association will be presenting at our next webinar on standards, which will be on the 27th of September. And then after all of the work that goes into developing standards, you'll want to ensure that they are used and that they are effective. I've mentioned that a step in the due process is consulting with members and other stakeholders on a draft standard. It can be very useful to hold a consultation meeting at that stage to explain the standard and to respond to initial questions. This starts the process of educating people about the standard. It also helps with building support for the standard, and it can prompt useful feedback that can be taken on board in finalising the standard. And depending on the the complexity of the standard and the complexity of the subject matter. It might also be useful to hold workshops after the final version is published to give people who are implementing the standard an opportunity to have more detailed discussion about interpretation and any issues arising. It can also be helpful to have a post-implementation review of how the standard setting process itself worked out in practice, and does it need to be fine-tuned. Also, you could engage with members, maybe through another workshop, maybe through a survey, after a year, say, of using the standard, to get feedback on whether they've encountered any substantive issues in implementing it, and on whether they believe that it has improved the quality of actuarial work. You could also engage with other stakeholders, such as regulators and non-actuarial business executives, on the question of the impact on the quality of work and whether having standards improves their confidence in actuarial work. Of course, standards can fall out of date. Reasons may include changes to the regulatory framework. They may include changes to the business environment, which means that a standard becomes less relevant over time. So it's good to have a process in place to do a routine review of your standards, maybe every 3 to 5 years. And in the interim, you will need to have communication systems in place to alert you to factors that might prompt the need for an earlier review. Finally, give some thought to how you'll deal with non-compliance with standards, and be sure to let members know. Typically, non-compliance will be dealt with through investigation under a disciplinary scheme, particularly for situations where non-compliance is extensive or has material impacts on persons affected by the actuary's work. If you haven't already done so, I suggest that you have a read of the paper Setting Actuarial Standards, published by the Standard Setters Roundtable in November 2017. Standard Setters Roundtable was a forum of various standard setting bodies that shared experiences and also tried to encourage the development of international standards and convergence of actuarial standards internationally. Their work has now been subsumed into the work of the IAA's Professionalism Committee. I think that paper is quite useful, and it also points to a number of other resources that you might find helpful. I mentioned that we have a webinar on the 27th of September. We'll be publishing details of that soon, so look out for that. In it, we'll hear about some real-life experiences of standard setting from Lisa Wade from the Caribbean Actuarial Association, and also Birgit Kaiser from the German Association. And then on the 25th of October, we plan to hold a virtual workshop. I mentioned earlier that a number of associations have specifically asked for help with development process and content, and we have reached out to those associations about this workshop. And our aim here is to have quite detailed discussions with those associations in small breakout groups, so that we can better understand their requirements and see in what ways can the IAA help them in this activity and help them to move forward. If your association didn't specifically ask for help before now, but would like to be involved in the workshop, if you are actively thinking about standard setting, would like to be involved in the discussions, get in touch with Amali sooner rather than later, because we're making arrangements for the workshop at the moment, and we will try to accommodate you. If we're inundated with requests, we might hold another workshop, because we do want to keep it to small discussion groups and keep the discussions as effective as we possibly can. Okay, I am now going to hand over to Hillevi. As I said, Hillevi is co-vice chair of the IAA's Actuarial Standards Committee. She's an experienced pensions actuary and chief risk officer, and has worked in the private and public sector in Finland. She has served in many roles in the IAA, including as president in 2007. In 2010, she led an IAA task force that produced a really interesting discussion paper on convergence of actuarial standards. Again, I think that's really good background reading, and it's available on the IAA website. She is, as well as being co-vice chair of the IAA's Actuarial Standards Committee, she chairs the corresponding committee within the Actuarial Association of Europe. So, busy lady. Over to you, Hillevi.
Yes, thank you, Yvonne, and good afternoon, or maybe I should say good day everyone. I'm very pleased to discuss with you this important subject. Yes, please, Yvonne, you have the slides. Great, thank you. To promote professionalism of our profession has always been a priority to the IAA, and actuarial standards are one key element there. Although IAA had issued some guidelines, it was just in 2010, as Yvonne mentioned, the IAA had a profound discussion on what role the IAA should have and what actions to take in promoting actuarial standards. At the time, we could see and we had seen that the regulation, especially in financial reporting and solvency regulation, was becoming and had become more international. A common and consistent response by the global actuarial profession was needed. This discussion led to the agreement that the IAA should start to develop model standards of actuarial practice on globally relevant issues that, over the long run, would lead to a sufficient level of convergence of actuarial standards around the world, where appropriate. And on this slide, you can see the vision and objectives of the IAA in relating to the international standards of actuarial practice. Later on, I speak Isaps. And as Yvonne have already told, these Isaps are established to promote high-quality actuarial practice globally and to help to serve the public interest of the users and stakeholders of actuarial profession. Also, and very importantly, as Yvonne also told, these Isaps aim to benefit, help actuarial associations and individual actuaries by enhancing the credibility of the actuarial profession and to give actuaries and associations the good, how would say, foundation to proceed in this matter. Though these are two important words here. First, these are global. This is a global international initiative. It doesn't. IAA respects very highly the subsidiarity principle of the member associations, and we only work on with the matters which has global relevance and demand also by the member associations. And as we are dealing with global issues, then the word convergence here is also an important, as I told about the development of international recreation, for example. So what is an actuarial standards? Next slide, please. Already Yvonne told us about that. Is it?
Sorry, Hillevi, the slide is just a bit slow advancing. If you want to keep talking, I'll try and sort it out.
I tried to speak slow.
Ah, here we are.
I would say.
Sorry about that.
And at this point, I would like to thank Godfrey Perrott, who is also there participating this event. I hope you don't mind my borrowing your very good slides. I'm sure. Okay, what is an actuarial standard? As Ivan already said, it's a statement of behavior expected of actuaries operating with a specific context. It is not saying to be the only way to work or the best practice or whatever. It sets a minimum standard on matters such as Ivan already mentioned, methodologies used and setting assumptions and communications and so on. The intention of a standard is to achieve greater consistency of the approach to actuarial practice in a given situation, but without unnecessary constraining actuarial judgment on creatively. So it's very important, the level and the language, the wording which we use in the standards, to give that guidance what is needed and not to go to too many details. The topic can be a general one to give basic framework for actuarial practice, or it can be a more detailed descriptions on a specific area of actuarial work, and for example, to complement with guidance, insurance, and pension regulation, for example. But on the next slide, Isaps, yes, it's much quicker now. Isaps are model standards. It's very important. Model standards means are just what they say, models, to be used by the local actuarial standard setters or associations to assist them, to give them help, not to reinvent the wheel again and again, and that is what we hope make them very, very beneficial or helpful to our associations. We encourage convergence of actuarial standards with these model standards, and as I said, they are model. They are not binding on any actuary. They not make any obligation to member association. They have full free to decide what to do with the model standards, with the Isaps. Actual standards, if you go back, actual standards are set by the authorized body, for example, your association, as Yvonne just told. They apply to the specific jurisdictions and they are binding to actuaries working in that jurisdiction and within the scope of the standards. For example, the group of your member associations who are binding with those standards. So how to use model standards? First, if the standard is fit for your purposes and your local regulation or legislation, you can adopt a model standard with only modifications in the drafting note, which means actually the more technical additions to what dates, what is the implementation date, and who are which actuaries or which groups of actuaries should be follow those and who they need to comply. And you can customize a model standard to respect to your local needs or your local association, while still ensuring substantial consistency. Or if that is not the circumstances in your country, then you can, or your jurisdiction, you can endorse a model standard by declaring it is appropriate for use in certain circumstances, if not in general in circumstances. Any of these may of course include translation of the model. These model standards are in English language, and you may usually the users of the Isaps translate them to their own language, but that is not a must. It's your decision. Other options there are also other options if you have already implemented standards in that particular area or scope. You can modify existing standards to take part of these Isaps to add what you think it is needed and to ensure substantial consistency. Or you can confirm that your existing standards are substantially consistent already. So many ways to use these standards for your own purposes. So it is important to also to acknowledge that when do we prepare Isaps? As I said, there are here are a list of general criteria to develop Isaps. First, of course, they need to be on topic which is relevant in it is globally relevant, which is wide enough to respond in global circumstances. Has widespread practical relevance to actuary work. That is what I tried to say. And it could be a traditional recognized area or emerging area of actuarial practice. In many cases, it can also be to complement to other existing pronouncements by supranational organizations like IAIS or IASB, which we also have had. But importantly, of course, is that if the IAA starts to work with Isaps, then there should be demonstrated need by IAM member associations that this that there is demand for this, and this is member association consider useful. So, and as I said about when we work to develop Isaps, it is also very important to emphasize when we do not develop a modest Isap. Of course, if the topic is a country specific or has a limited applicability, then we don't do it. And a modest standard would not add value to actuarial work in the broader scale. That is very important. So subsidiarity principle is also here very important. Okay, then we have a list. I have the next slide. I have a list of the Isaps IAA already has implemented. The first one, Isap 1, was implemented in 2012. And this is a general guidance to guidance basic actuarial work. And this is also a base for all the rest, or the other Isaps. This you should implement if you are implementing any of these other it creates the basis for the other. You can also see that there is several areas. There are accounting, risk management, social security, financial analysis, and these are already issued. Last one issued was this Isap 4 on IFRS 17. Currently, we are working on Isap 7, which relates to the IAIS capital standards, and this is under development at the moment. We are also considering currently an Isap on climate-related risks that is going to be discussed also, I believe, in council meeting this fall. We have also the Isaps also have use different terms, and it is also, as Yvonne mentioned, it's also important to define the terms you are used. And so there is a IAA glossary for that. All these terms in these different Isaps are included there. Isaps are reviewed at least every 5 years. On the years you can year range you can see there explains the first and last edition of the Isap. But that's what I had to say about Isaps. I speak a little bit about the International Actuarial Notes, IANs, which is the other side of the Isaps. Isaps are meant to be standards. These actuarial notes are meant to be educational documents, which provide more information about issues or topics which are relevant, but not needed. But there is no need for a standard. These may complement the standards, or also they can be on topic which is not yet developed to that stage that we can introduce a standard. It's, for example, a new emerging area of actuarial practice. Very important is that these are educational documents, and they do not impose any obligation to any member association or any individual actuary. They, on the third bullet point, you see, if you read it, you can. I want to emphasize the word might. That is very important concerning EANs. They are not saying what is the best practice or what you should do. They introduce different approaches to those matters. And I have issued one first EAN number 100. I don't know why it's 100, because it's the first one, but it's a very heavy package concerning IFRS 17, and it's very important in addition to the ISAP 4. But all the member associations do not have standards, and therefore, as Ivan said earlier, the IAA has discussed about how to help member associations to enhance and develop their own actuarial practice standards. And this is a discussion which has been going on for a while within the IAA, and especially with some questions by member association. How can the IAA help them in this area? The Isaps are related to globally relevant issues, and therefore they are not enough to create a steady basis for an association for a local standards for a member association. And for these concerns, the IAA has considered to create specimen actuarial standards. That would be a new concept. On the next slide, there a little bit more about this initiative. The idea is that these would be more generic topic on traditional work, and they would be based for an association to create own locally modified actuarial practice standards. So we saw that this could be a way for especially smaller and developing actuarial associations which do not have plenty of resources to do the whole work their own, and would be benefit for some basic work done by IAA and then continue from that basic model to fit that to the local circumstances. There are some issues here mentioned which could be, or topics which could be areas to prepare these specimen actuarial standards. The question actually is that the question to you and the member associations of the IAA, is this something you would like to see? Is it something that you think would be benefit your own initiatives, or is there some other kind of support you would be happy to have from the IAA? This is a discussion which we would like to also to see, and maybe today or maybe later during those working sessions even introduced to. So I think I rest here. So I leave here and we can start discussion, and if you have any questions or whatever advice to me or us to Actuary Standard Committee, I would be very happy of that discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Hilary. That was great. And I want to bring Simon into the discussions here. So Simon, as I said earlier, is an observer to the IA's Professionalism Committee. He's also Project Director Pensions at the UK's Financial Reporting Council. He's an experienced pensions actuary. He's worked both in the UK and in the USA. He's had responsibility in his career for domestic actuarial practices and for the global oversight of international benefits businesses. He's worked for a wide range of different types of organisations and at senior levels. So thank you, Simon, for joining us today and helping us to respond to the questions from the attendees.
Thank you.
Now I'll hand over to Amali to host the Q&A session.
Thank you, Yvonne. Thank you, Yvonne and Hilary, for the interesting and informative presentations. We have a few questions. I'll read them out. The first one is from Gabao Hanak. He asks, why should our association develop or adopt compulsory actuarial practice standards if applying them would be an extra burden for our members compared to non-members doing practically the same work? Yvonne, would you like to take that one?
I'll give it a go. Thank you, Gabor. Yeah, it's an interesting question, and it's one that comes up more and more, particularly as more actuaries get involved in work that sees them working alongside professionals from other disciplines, such as risk management, data science, and so forth. And do the standards create an extra burden? I would argue not necessarily so. I mean, as professionals, we always try to do our work in the most professional way, in a way that delivers high quality work. And what standards are trying to do is support actuaries in doing that. I think that standards, yes, they set a high bar, but they should not set an unreasonably high bar. And standards should always be appropriate, and they should be proportionate. In many standards, you'll see wording, along the lines, the actuary should have regard to the nature, scale, and complexity of the task, and so forth, in applying the standard. I think that, more generally as well, that standards do act as a support to actuaries in and help them to point to benchmarks, objectively and independently established benchmarks that they are following in the interest of producing high quality work, and work that is therefore of greater benefit and greater value to their clients, be that their employers, be they clients of a consultancy firm or whatever, and ultimately for the benefit of the end users. I mean, the question of, why have standards at all, and do they increase the cost of actual work, applies whether actuaries are working in, if you like, non-traditional fields or doing traditional actuarial roles. But I think we also have to bear in mind that there is a cost in not applying standards. Typically actuaries do get involved in quite complex work and work that has significant consequences, and the consequences of getting it wrong can be very damaging and very expensive for actuaries, clients, the users of the work, the ultimate beneficiaries of the work. So, I think there is always a balance to be struck. There are also trade-offs, but I think that in striving to set standards that are professional, but at the same time appropriate and proportionate, we can deliver supports to members of our associations, we can deliver value to the users of actuaries' work, and ultimately enhance the credibility of the actuarial profession, to the benefit of the profession, but ultimately to the benefit of the public as well. I don't know if Hillevi or Simon would have other thoughts on that or would like to add to that.
Yeah, if I may. And Hillevi, did you want to say something?
No, please, Simon, do you
just
go ahead?
Yeah, I'd like to reiterate what Yvonne has said, and also to say that ultimately, I mean, you've seen the word in the presentations rely upon quite a lot, and the standards provide comfort to people, to society, to users, that they know they can rely on the information they're being provided. So there's value in that, and maybe the question is, does the extra benefit that users get from these standards, is that more than the extra cost that might be involved? And I think that the feedback we get in the UK is that, generally speaking, the answer to that is yes. People feel a comfort in the same way. If you have in the UK, a plumber come round and you've got a problem to be fixed, knowing that they subscribe to a particular code of standards gives you comfort they can do the job properly. And the same thing applies, even though you may not know exactly what's in those standards in the code, you just know that they're going to provide a competent job for you. And the same applies to the standards here. So it's by having standards, the standing of the professions increases in terms of the public eye, because the users know that they can have a greater faith in the ability of the actuaries to be able to deliver.
Yes, nothing to add. That was very good point. Now, the two sides of the coin: the public to rely on the work, comfort for the public, and also comfort for the actuary. Actuary knows that he or she is doing what is expected, and he can be on ease with that, I would say.
Okay, thank you. We have another question from Octavio Rojas. He's saying, I'm trying to relaunch the Venezuelan Actuarial Association, and he would like to know whether the webinars can be held in other languages, for example, in Spanish.
Delighted to hear about relaunching the Venezuelan Association. To be perfectly honest, we haven't thought about whether we could deliver the webinars in Spanish or in another language. So let us take that away and think about it and see. Personally, my foreign language skills are a bit lacking. But we'll have to see what resources we have within our pool of volunteers to perhaps do something in different languages. So let us take that one away and think about it.
Yeah, thank you. Then we have somebody asked whether we can get a copy of the Isaps from the IAA, and I copied the link. It's all available on the IAA website. And then David Rush wants to know, how will the proposed sample standards be different from Isaps?
Yes, I can take that. Isaps and SASIs. Okay. As I said, Isaps are model standards on internationally globally relevant matters, which as you could see on the list of the what we had, they are addition, especially response to how I would say, to special features of topics. They do not cover the basic standards, which usually are traditional standards, which usually explain, for example, how, as I said, the topics here, pension funding and insurance reserving, these are traditional areas and some basic actuarial work topics. And many associations have first, there can be different legislation concerning, for example, these issues. Many associations already have standards on these matters, and especially we are now speaking about topics which are locally relevant in that jurisdictions, and then in that particular circumstances. Therefore, IAA does not issue Isaps in the international standards of actuarial practice on those areas, because we do not issue locally implemented standards. But to help member associations to create own standards which are fit for the local circumstances and fit for their legislation and the requirement concerning the basic generic topics of actuarial practice, we consider that SASIs could be an initiative to describe the basic elements of a standard in that kind of in that topic, on which the member association can then continue and fulfill the holes with their own specific regulation and demands in that area. So it's very different from Isaps. I hope I made clear. And actually, you can. There is a paper on this this initiative on the IAA website. Stupid of me, I haven't put it a link here to the document on this presentation.
I think it's probably true to say as well, Hillevi, is that the IA has received feedback from various different associations that they would like to develop standards, and maybe they'd like to use standards already set by another association as a starting point, and could the IAA help them with doing that and with adapting some other associations' standards. But for the from practical logistical purposes, and given the IA does only have a finite amount of resources, for the pool of volunteers within the IA to become familiar with the standards of lots of different associations, and then work with individual associations to see how the Australian standards might be adapted to one country and the UK standards might be adapted for another country, will be quite a monumental task. So the part of the drive, at least around specimen actuarial standards, was to try and come up with a suite of standards that might be quite easily adapted to local situations. I see a question here in the Q&A from David Minty, presumably could be developed by taking existing local standards of a cross-section of member associations which have already done work in those areas. And well, my understanding is yes, certainly if we go ahead with developing specimen actuarial standards, we would certainly be looking at the standards that have been developed by various actuarial associations around the world, and certainly drawing on those for ideas on how a specimen standard on a particular topic that can be implemented by different countries wherever they are in the world can best be developed.
Yes, that's good addition to the question. Yes, you can take some existing local standards, but as Yvonne explained, usually they are part of a broader set of standards, and it's difficult to modify them to a local environment, especially if you are developing your first standards when you don't have other standards structure to put it in. And also the idea of SASIs, I may not have said it very clearly, is that this would be very simple, have the basic information or elements which a standard in that topic would need to be discussed. So that there is something simple, should I say, strawman, is that strom, that's an English word, I think it is. So where the local, from which the local association can start with.
I think maybe when we post these slides to the website, Amali, we could add into them the link to the paper on specimen actuarial standards that Olivia mentioned, and people can have a look at it at their leisure and
yes, definitely
find out a bit more about the proposal.
Yes, definitely. When we share the recording, we will share the link to the paper as well.
Okay.
Thank you. We have one more question on in the chat. It's from Ksenia Sankovic. Is there a defined or recommended process of adopting standards in IA regulations which member associations should follow?
Okay, so in the internal regulations, there's a piece on due process that sets out various steps that should be included in any association's due process for standards. The regulations aren't overly prescriptive on this, but the things that they set out, I think, are very useful pointers about key elements of a due process for standards. Of course, the IA does itself have a due process for Isaps, and it has a due process for IAN's International Actuarial Notes as well. So those are also resources that could be looked at, and I think a number of associations do publish their due process on their websites. So to answer your question, I wouldn't go so far as saying that it's a defined or recommended process set out in the regulations, but there is a requirement to have a process, and the regulations do call out some specific steps that should be included in the process. So hopefully they're helpful in that regard.
Thank you, Van. We have one more question from Fred Weber. I find the Isaps very useful for the member associations to not reinvent the wheel. Are there such models or templates for codes of professional conduct?
Well, that's an interesting question. Again, within the internal regulations, I think it's in the internal regulations.
Yes, it is the internal.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. There's a requirement to have a code of conduct, and it sets down again various things that should be addressed in the code of conduct. But it's not really a model or a template as such. The AAE, the Actuarial Association of Europe, took a slightly different approach, and they did come up with a model code of conduct. And the AAE requirement is that the code of conduct of individual associations must reflect at least the requirements that are set out in its model code. And to the best of my knowledge, quite a few associations in the AAE have codes of conduct that are very similar to the AAE's model. So they've taken the AAE's model, they've examined it, they've thought about its application in local circumstances, they've thought about whether there are other things that they need to add. When that AAE code was being developed, and I know this because I led the working group, we did examine the IAA requirements as well, because of course a lot of the AAE member associations are also members of the IAA, and we wanted to ensure, as far as possible, wholly I think, that AAE associations that took the AAE model code and pretty much adopted it would also be compliant with the IAA requirements. So if you're looking for a template for a code of conduct, a good place to look might be the AAE website.
Thank you. I don't see any other questions online. Oh, there's another question that just came in. May I also, it's from Apriyadi Umazuna. May I also know if there is a plan on specific standard for Islamic insurance?
Not that I'm aware of. Are you aware, Hillevi, has there been any discussion about that at Actuarial Standards Committee? Has it been raised at all?
No, that has been not raised at all. And no, I don't know if those standards exist anywhere, or it may exist, but I'm not aware.
And there's no discussion within the IAA on such a standard, yes.
I think Apriyadi, and I hope that I pronounced that reasonably well, if this is something that you feel the IA should be thinking about, or if your association thinks you should be thinking about it, you know, feed that in maybe through your representative on the professionalism committee or one of the practice committees, or if you don't have representatives at the moment, maybe drop a Maddie a line and tell us about your idea or what's on your mind, and I'm sure it can be discussed. Simon, I know that the IFOA has members in various parts of the world. Have you any awareness of whether that might have come up in discussions in the UK?
Not to my knowledge.
You're aware of, yeah.
Certainly in the UK, it's also an issue that's becoming a larger issue in the UK about Islamic insurance. But there's nothing in the actuarial standards that relates to it at the moment. It's certainly something that we should be thinking about.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
I don't see any more questions online or in the chat.
I don't either, so I think we're pretty much coming to the end of our time anyway, so maybe I'll wrap up the webinar at this point. I want to say a huge thank you to Hillevi and to Simon and to Amani for your participation, your help, your contribution today. Also to Nancy and to Christian who helped us with the IT setup and logistics and so forth. Many thanks. And a particular thanks to all of you who attended here today. I really do hope that you got something out of it, that you found it useful, that there was some food for thought in it. If any more questions strike you afterwards, I'm sure Amali won't mind if you email her and she'll fire them off to one of us to get back to you. And as she has said, recording will be available on YouTube soon, and a copy of the slides and link to the recording will be available on the IAA website. Do look out for the information on our next webinar on the 27th of September, when we'll be talking about standard setting in Germany and in the Caribbean. And I think that will be very useful in terms of, we've talked in abstract ways today about standard setting. It would be really interesting to hear from people who've been doing this. What have their experiences been? How do they get started? What issues arose on the way? How did they address them and learn from those experiences? And then we'll build on that further when we go into the virtual workshops towards the end of October. As I said, if your association hasn't been contacted about those but would like to be involved, please get in touch with Amali sooner rather than later, and we'll see can we include you in those. So I shall leave it with that. And one last thank you, of course, is to the other members of the Professionalism Committee and the Actuarial Standards Committee, who also helped us to develop the ideas for these virtual events and the content for today. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you again, everybody, and have a great day. Bye now.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Bye.